Your position is already there.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I kindly request you to please take your seats. Thank you.
Where is Kunti? Sorry. The video will be playing afterwards. We are not playing now because people will come. The video not playing. We go first this one, first this one, second this one, and then third one is video. So this is first. This is first. This is first. This is second, and then video third. Yeah, because when people are full, then only we should talk.
Yesterday you had today you don't have. Chair is coming now?
Yes. Just to take a seat, actually, if there's an announcement once again, people are still standing. At the back, everyone is standing.
Just do
kindly
like
request to take a seat.
Yes.
Just kindly take a seat.
Yeah.
So that Excellency can.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, may I kindly request you to please take your seats so that the opening session can begin. Thank you.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the meeting is called to order. We are now resuming with the consideration of Agenda Item 15, matters pertaining to the Second United Nations Environment Programme Forum of Ministers and Environment Authorities of Asia Pacific. Chair thanks the President of the Chair invites Mr. Seong Soo Ho, Vice Chair of the Senior Officials Meeting Bureau, to present briefly the Senior Officials reports. Senior Officials Chair, please take a restroom, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excellencies and distinguished delegates, I'm pleased to report on the result of the senior officers meeting that took place earlier this week. Excellencies and delegates may refer to the document UNAP/APEMV Forum 2/6. Next. For the opening of the senior officers segment, His Excellency Mr. Simachaya, the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment of Thailand, chaired the session. Then His Excellency Mr. Ramon Paye, the Vice President of the United Nations Environment Assembly, delivered the inaugural address. Then the meeting elected the Bureau, comprising the chair and 2 vice chairs. Next, please. The senior officers had an opportunity to review the implementation of the UNEA resolutions and decisions after the brief introduction by the Secretariat. Then the delegates discussed and identified the regional priorities, such as responding to environmental health risks associated with pollution, protecting natural capital and ecosystem integrity, decoupling resource use from economic growth, strengthening environmental governance, and scientific basis for policymaking. Next, please. Delegates also discussed the draft resolution of the UNEA. These include draft resolution on marine litter and microplastics, lead paints, and air quality in cities. Next, please. Also, environment and health nexus, and the synchronization of objectives and activities of MEAs. Next, please. The delegates also dealt with the draft declaration of the UNEA 3. Some of the preliminary views expressed were the need to include reference to common environment and development-related principles, types of outcome document, whether it should be a declaration or chair summary, need to focus on progress achieved to date, and the future role of UNEA, among others. Next, please. The meeting briefly dealt with the institutional arrangements, in particular, the application of the UNEA rules of procedure for the future meetings of the forum. Next, please. There were also various inputs from civil society groups. For example, welcoming CSO forum organized by the UNEP and the ESCAP, calling for increased participation in the forum and the UNEA, calling for an action to address the issues like promoting sustainable agriculture and traditional knowledge, and calling for studies on new and emerging technologies. Next. I'll skip this part and next, please. And this ends my presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Seong. I ask ministers and heads of delegation to take note of the key elements of the report, of the senior officers' reports, and now call upon His Excellency Mr. Raza Bashir Tarar, High Commissioner, Islamic Republic of Pakistan, and Vice Chair of the Committee of Permanent Representative, United Nations Environment Programme, to briefly introduce the draft resolution of the United Nations Environment Assembly for its third session. Thank you. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor and a privilege to be here, to be able to talk to this August gathering. And as I submitted earlier, in Nairobi, as of now, we have 2 draft resolutions eliminating exposure to lead paint by the USA and substantially improving air quality in cities to within healthy levels for human exposure by Sudan. And we have, of course, a third one by our very own Mr. Pahe, by the Republic of the Philippines, which is entitled a resolution calling for the synchronization of objectives and activities, especially the conduct of meetings of the conferences of the parties / governing bodies of multilateral environmental agreements and protocols for efficient implementation and monitoring of the Agenda 2030 and for cost reduction and effective participation of UN member states. Then we have 2 proposals for draft resolution. One is an outline on marine litter and microplastics by Norway, and there's a concept note on environment and health by the European Union and its member states. We are expecting to receive more resolutions, although the general plea has been to restrict the number of resolutions to at the most 10, and there has been talk in Nairobi to have either like a gentleman's agreement or a bit of a show of tough love, as they say, because the rules of procedure don't really allow us to put like a cutoff point. But the expectation is that delegations should avoid bringing in resolutions at the very last stage. If a resolution, technically it can come right even towards the end, but that does not lend itself to a credible discussion. And sometimes, in case there are controversial aspects, then that can lead to an unpleasant situation also, where a vote can be called. And so the idea is to avoid that as much as possible, sir. The member states and regional groups have been requested to send actual texts for the resolutions, and we have the second deadline of 22nd September 2017. So not too many days to go. Consultations on draft resolutions will be convened with the participation of lead contributors from the Bureau of the Committee of Permanent Representatives and focal points assigned from the UN Environment Program divisions for each resolution in order to facilitate the consultation process and provide expertise to member states. A compilation of draft resolutions will be approved during the 3rd meeting of the open-ended Committee of Permanent Representatives to be held from 29th November to the 1st of December 2017 and subsequently transmitted to the 3rd session of the United Nations Environment Assembly for its adoption. And needless to say, our plea to the regional groups and individual member states is to work closely and to synthesize their efforts and try to contribute to the success of UNEA 3. Then, Mr. Chairman, there is the draft declaration, and as you know, we have heard views expressed about it. To its credit, the Secretariat has very faithfully included those in the draft, an outcome document, if you will, for want of a better term, and that is like in the account of what has happened in the senior officials meeting. And hopefully we will have a greater chance to reflect upon it and to take it further in Nairobi. I want to, of course, assure everybody that the idea is to, of course, if you permit me to say that, I think the basic rationale of the president of UNEA giving at least some elements, if you see the text, one gets the feeling that maybe they are a bit intangible or aspirational. But the rationale is that there is this frequent refrain that the documents we produce are kind of for our internal consumption, and maybe the common man cannot relate to it. So there is an attempt to do that. But of course, then delegations also have individual concerns that that the document should not create perhaps an obligation that they are not prepared to assume. So we will certainly be making an effort to factor in the different concerns and different positions. And certainly it is a live document, and it's work in progress, nothing cut and dried. And I'm sure we'll be able to reach some sort of an agreement. Of course, we've also heard some preferences for a chair summary. Our hope is that it doesn't go in that direction. Technically it can, because we need everybody's agreement. But the idea would be to have like a concise, forward-looking document which can, to the best of our ability, which can spell out tangible targets and, of course, make life more difficult for our friends in the Secretariat here and elsewhere, to basically, as they say, walk the talk. We are fighting against this perennial skepticism when it comes to matters related to the environment. So we certainly have to guard against that, sir. So the zero draft is out there. I mean, it's accessible. Delegations have already reacted to it. And obviously, the more unified position, sir, that we have in the Asia-Pacific group will, of course, be great. Asia-Pacific group has the majority of the world population. And we have certainly seen it come a long way in Nairobi from a rather skeptical kind of a situation where people were not very willing to attend meetings. And some of our, friends have seen that firsthand. To now, we have a stage where people are taking very genuine interest. And that's a good sign. And it shows the benefit of the leadership of course, high-level functionaries like yourself, sir, who give this direction and make us, the bureaucrats, realize that something has to be done and we have to, be as tangible as possible. So, informal consultations will take place on the 4th and 31st October in Nairobi. And of course, the preliminary draft before that is supposed to come on the 13th of September, and a final draft on the 20th of October. And it is our hope to adopt the declaration during UNEA 3. I'm sure most of you will be there to witness that. And so once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for affording me the opportunity to once again submit this to this very learned gathering. And our hope is that we can forge consensus, and any concerns that any delegation has, we have a very able team here, and I'm sure they'll be very swift in conveying it to the people steering the process. And certainly we are in your hands at any stage if there is any concern that you want to voice. If you think you said something during the proceedings here and it was not heeded or not factored into that, you can also point that out. So the lines of communication are open, and thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Excellency, for the comprehensive introduction of the draft declaration. I'd like to inform distinguished guests, distinguished delegates that the senior officials meeting had discussed the issue under agenda item 8, and I will soon invite ministers and delegations, head of delegations for their statements for further deliberation. But before that, I thought it's useful that we share a video message from the President of the UN Environment Assembly, Dr. Edgar Guterres, Minister of Environment and Energy of Costa Rica, and the President of 2017 UN Environment Assembly. Can we see the video, please?
Very warm greetings from Costa Rica to all delegates to this ministerial regional consultation. Thanks to the scientific basis for action provided by UN Environment, we now know where we need to take action, whether for the air we breathe, the chemicals in our lives, or the health of our seas. By cherishing and protecting the environment, we can therefore make a real difference for both people and planet at the 3rd UN Environment Assembly in Nairobi this December, to be held under the theme Towards a Pollution-Free Planet, which I very much hope you will attend. Your region has shown that it can lead by example in bringing about solutions. This requires high-level political commitment. Support for a strong negotiated outcome document is therefore vital. I have just come from the Environment Assembly Joint Bureau, where we discussed all the preparation for this assembly, which is the world's highest level decision-making body on the environment. It offered us with the chance to send a strong joint message on how we want to fight pollution, to protect health, contribute to the aspiration of current and future generations, and extol the value of the natural resources upon which we all depend. I therefore hope that your work today will help build an understanding of what resolutions we can aim for together at the next Environment Assembly to make as big a difference as we can to people's lives. We have the knowledge, science, and partners to create a better future for all, but we need the political will to make a difference to the lives of our citizens and future generations. They demand no less. I wish you a fruitful consultation today and look forward to seeing many of you in Nairobi in December. Together, we can move towards a pollution-free planet.
The Chair thanks the President of the UN Environment Assembly for his guidance on the 2017 UN Environment Assembly and his draft political declaration addressing the theme of the 3rd session of UN Environment Assembly towards a pollution-free planet. I now call upon ministers and head of delegations to give their brief statement. May I provide some guidance as to how we will do this? Firstly, we have to confine our statement to 3 minutes because we don't have that much time to finish, to ensure we can finish on time. Secondly, delegations who are unable to read the statements can also submit their written statement to the Secretariat, and key messages will be reflected in the Chair summary. We will also give priority to statements from head of delegations as well as ministers, followed by UN organizations, and then intergovernmental organization as well. UN organization and intergovernmental organizations, as well as civil service society after that. For that, I may now call upon the first for the ministerial statement. The name? Minister from Lao PDR. You have the chair. You have the microphone.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. There are several disadvantages of the environmental pollution which are harmful to the nature and human being. It is undeniable that the pollution is caused from human activities, especially the unsustainable use of natural resources. Lao PDR considers that the pollution-free planet campaign is a collective effort and requires effective transboundary cooperation. As a pollution is created from different sources, different locations, and they are boundaryless. The pattern from the resource utilizations had directly influenced the country's institutional capacity on climate change mitigation and resilience. The resource use efficiency and optimization play a critical role in the reducing the pollution production, which later support the greenhouse gas emission reduction. Therefore, we need to put great effort to the sustainable consumption and production. The sustainable use of natural resources should be defined as a top priority in the country development plan. Lao PDR emphasized on the environment protection and climate change adaptation and mitigation, as reflected in our INDC as well as our National Socio-Economic Development Plan. This approach is translated into a number of priority actions. Importantly, the cooperation enhancements of the environmental protection networking at the regional and international level, which include the collective surveillance and countermeasures through the ASEAN network, GMS, core environment programs, and the implementation of multilateral environmental agreement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency. We now call upon Head of Delegation from Japan. You have the microphone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Japan appreciates the initiative of the President of the UNEA to develop the zero draft of the ministerial outcome document of the 2017 UN Environment Assembly towards a pollution-free planet. We'd like to reiterate our position that a chair's summary is more desirable than a negotiated outcome document, such as a declaration, to have a realistic, concise, well-focused, and action-oriented output. Also, we should avoid the situation where we would end up having no outcome document at all, bearing in mind the lesson learned from UNEA 2. With regard to the contents of the document, we have some inputs as follows. First, the document should specify the meaning of pollution-free, since pollution-free is a literal sense is practically unachievable. The concept of risk management should be clearly stated in order to elaborate on that phrase. Second, we support including awareness raising and knowledge sharing in the first bullet of paragraph 5. Cooperation with various groups from the private sector, civil society, and other stakeholders is crucial to address pollution. We believe that it is important how we should share and disseminate scientific knowledge and experiences gained from the negative impacts caused by the pollution in the past. Third, we also support including reuse, recycle, and sound management of chemicals and waste in the third and the fourth bullet of paragraph 5. We still have a lot of waste which is harmful to our health and the environment. Therefore, it is important to manage those risks in a preventive way by collecting and garnering scientific knowledge about the waste. On the other hand, we have the following concerns, and they should be identified. First, it is impossible for us to judge whether each example referred to in paragraph 1 is correct or not. Second, sources of each statistical figure in paragraph 3 and 5 are not clear. I hope these inputs will be useful in developing this important document. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I now call upon Head of Delegation from Thailand to make statements, please. Thailand, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, Thailand would like to thank the UN Environment and the APCR for the draft Declaration of Union at its third session, outlining important pollution issues that we are all facing today. I just want to share with you a few issues of our concern. Thailand is also experiencing impacts of chemicals and waste, including plastic in the ocean. Marine plastic debris is one of our priority concerns that threaten our coastal tourism and ocean ecosystem. We need cooperation among all stakeholders to address this problem. Sound management of chemical and waste is also highlighted as an approach to reducing chemical waste pollution we are facing because of rapid industrialization and urbanization. In this regard, we hope that the ministerial outcome of the third session of UNEA be in the form of declaration so that it can be a driving force for achieving pollution-free planet. This will urge ministers responsible for the environment around the globe to have stronger commitment to combat all kinds of pollutions, thus help us move towards pollution-free planet. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call upon the head of delegate from China to deliver the statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, distinguished ministers and delegates. I would like to point out two issues. One is with regard to the draft declaration for Union 3. And I have two concerns. The first one is with regard to the format issue. This is something I have already pointed out in the senior officials meeting. We should consider what are the messages our region would like to deliver to Union 3. I would like to point out that the current format in the first para is not a regulatory format. It gives the public negative message. I believe that the positive message should be also included. The normal approach is to summarize what we have done, the progress we have made, and then followed by the challenges we are still facing or the future challenges, emerging challenges will come. And then followed by the actions we are going to take. This is the normal format. So this is the first point. Second one is regarded to the substantial issues with the text. When we look at the declarations international community has passed in the or adopted in the past few years, or even for the last 20 years. Most of the important principles in the area of environmental and development has been always included in their text. So I would like to suggest that the important principles adopted in Rio Declaration and followed by other important declarations should be included. And I also noticed that, the declaration from our meeting for ESCAP is also included. For example, common but differentiated responsibilities, financial assistance, technology transfer should be included. And we hope that the expectations from the region can be delivered to Union 3. This is the first. Second, with the agenda item 9 about the institutional arrangement for the forum, for the ministerial forum of our region. My delegation would expect introduction by the Secretariat yesterday, but it was not happened. It was in such a hurry that my delegation was not quick enough to request an intervention. So I would like to point out that this is a procedure issue. And also I would like to take this opportunity to share some views of my delegation. May I recall that the basic objectives of the forum. The forum can function as an important and a useful platform for exchange of views, progress, practice, or even lessons, concerns by our members in this region, with a view to provide regional input for the Union. My delegation would like to also point out the fact the forum itself is not a decision-making mechanism nor a decision-making body. By saying this, my delegation would remind our respected delegates that given the difference between the forum and the UNEA, while adopting the rules of procedures for UNEA really meet the needs of our forum here. In the global agenda on development and the environment, the consensus approach is overwhelmingly used. This is my intervention. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for the inputs from delegation from China. I also agree that this forum is indeed one of important forum for delegations and countries to put forth their views and to share their concerns towards UNEA conference at the end of the year. And we will continue to open for inputs. And now let me invite a delegation from Bhutan to give their intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Chairman, Excellencies, delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Pollution is a threat to life on the earth, and Bhutan is ready to fight any form of pollution. The Royal Government of Bhutan reaffirms our commitment in achieving this very important goal of pollution-free Asia-Pacific. We are committed in achieving the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We have committed to remain carbon neutral in Paris, and we are also party to many of the multilateral environmental agreements, such as Basel Convention on Control of Transboundary Hazardous Waste and their disposal, Convention to Combat Desertification, Vienna Convention, and many more. In an effort towards achieving the goal of pollution-free, the Royal Government of Bhutan has put in place the required legislation and enabling policy environment. The National Environment Protection Act the Environment Assessment Act, Waste Prevention and Management Act, Water Act are all in place. The government also approved the National Strategy for Integrated Solid Waste Management and the National Integrated Water Resource Management Plan, providing necessary guidance and approaches to the line agencies and local government and other stakeholders in implementing the waste and water management. Through government and citizen initiative, many actions are on ground. We have our private sector involved in waste collection and segregation in many of the urban cities. We have also civil societies in promoting awareness and engaging citizens in waste collection, engaging single parents in generating income from waste, providing toilets during public gathering to control open defecation. The community-based initiative on cleaning and adoption of rivers and streams are picking up in the country to maintain clean and free-flowing rivers. Under the Sustainable Consumption and Production and Ozone Project, supported by UN Environment, many initiatives such as green public procurement, development of paperless guidelines, inclusion of SCPs in the curriculum of Vocational Training Institute, and non-formal educations are ongoing. We have made genuine effort with our own capacity to move towards resource efficient and pollution free. As highlighted yesterday by many of our distinguished delegates, many ways deterioration of air and water quality due to ever-increasing population, economic growth, increase in trade and consumption pattern would be the biggest challenge in this part of the region if we do not join our hands together today to address this issue. We reform our commitment for pollution-free planet. As well, we all need to breathe fresh air, drink clean water, and eat organic food. But we need support and greater contribution to strengthen our science-based data, technology, and capacity building to achieve this goal. Therefore, we recognize the important role of UN Environment and UN ESCAP in bridging this gap. We are fully committed for resource-efficient and pollution-free world. Thank you, and touch the leg.
Thank you, Excellency. May I now call upon the head of delegate from Maldives. You have the microphone.
Mr. Chair, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning. This year's theme for the UNEA and this summit captures one of the most pressing issues facing the world today. Pollution in its various forms threatens our environment and human well-being. As one of the fastest growing regions in the world, we must remain mindful of the environmental and social implications of these changes. We have made significant progress in integrating these concerns into our policy agendas. We must remain steadfast in our commitment to sustainable development and its goals. Progress in this regard is contingent on our efforts to decouple development and resource use with environmental degradation. We must also be mindful of the critical drivers and sources that lead to environmental degradation. Poverty constitutes as one of the most important components of this equation. Poverty is a cause and has increasingly become a result of environmental degradation. It is the poor and the most vulnerable that have to bear the brunt of these impacts. In this regard, I echo the rallying call for the SDG in leaving no one behind. Mr. Chair, when we consider the issue of pollution, we must not forget its human face. In addition to the numerous environmental problems, pollution also has very real impacts on the health and well-being of our people. We are determined to take action on this pressing issue for the sake of our environment and our people. However, as a small island development state with limited resources, we require additional support in realizing these policy goals, including assistance towards establishing adequate infrastructure for the sound management of chemicals and waste and monitoring air quality. at this juncture. Let me also emphasize the importance of BPOA, MSI, and the Samoa pathway for small island developing states such as the Maldives. It captures our concerns and priorities, as well as the direction for sustainable development in small island development states. It is essential that these aspects be reflected in both our discussions here as well as at UNEA. We are faced with increasing marine pollution from transboundary sources. At the national level, we are taking action to reduce ocean plastics. Currently, we are exploring modalities and policy options to reduce ocean plastic pollution. While many countries in our region and elsewhere have taken important steps towards addressing marine pollution, we still need to do more. As such, we must intensify our regional and international collaboration and coordination mechanisms and catalyze global collective action. Before I conclude, let me stress the importance of taking a holistic approach towards environmental protection and conservation. It's important that we bring in various facets of sustainable development into this picture. Poverty and its links to the environment needs to be recognized. The drivers of environmental degradation need to be taken into account. It's only through such a holistic approach that we can secure our collective future. Thank you.
Thank you. I recognize requests from Indonesia and Iran. Indonesia, you have the microphone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for giving me another floor. Firstly, let me echoing other delegation in thanking the President of UNEA and the Secretariat in preparing the zero draft outcome of the UNEA 3. To add to my delegation statement during these last 3 days, let me reiterate some substantial points on how to move forward and to make toward resource-efficient and pollution-free planet a workable agenda for all, and to be reflected in the discussion of the UNEA 3. First, we should ensure that the sustainable development is the central goals of the global development agenda. All stakeholders for development should work toward this goal to achieve the sustained and inclusive economic growth. Second, strengthening multi-layer collaboration and regional as well as global cooperation and partnership is a matter of urgency as well as to mobilize the resources. Third, development policy and strategies at all levels should be guided by the principle of resource-efficient and sustainable development. In this regard, inclusive and green economic principle could act as one of the promising tools to achieve our targets. Fourth, by taking into account national priorities and circumstances and level of development of each country, the agenda of resource-efficient and pollution-free will be able to help us to move towards sound economic transformation, poverty eradication, and environmental sustainability, thus to achieve development that is sustainable, inclusive, and equitable. At the end, many important concerns and views has been stated and shared since the senior official segment meeting up to today. Thus, it is important to have those views to be well reflected, not only statement and views or concern from the delegation of the country, but also including those from other organizations, including the civil society. And lastly, my delegation will continue to work on the draft outcome document. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Indonesia. Can we now hear from Iran, please?
Thank you, Chair. A very good morning to you all, colleagues. I thoroughly appreciate the efforts put in by yourself and my distinguished colleague, Commissioner Reza Bashir, regarding the issues that are likely to appear or at the moment are placed as the agenda items within the forthcoming UNEA 3. I'd like to just probably repeat partially what I said a while ago regarding the UNEA 3 working atmosphere, since although it is very much appreciated that it is going to be very limited to a handful of draft resolutions and a very short period of time for them to be considered but negotiated, the prevailing atmosphere is very much of a negotiating type, and thus any form of outcome document is very much susceptible to the issues of words and even sentences, even at times down to very trivial and small matters having got to be discussed. And whilst I very much appreciate, as it was earlier on raised, that the declaration is of very inspirational type, but at times we get very much attached to the working atmosphere, that even as we witnessed in the videotape displayed, that the UNIA 3 president also indicated a negotiated outcome document, whereas that outcome document, that the zero draft of which is being circulated, to the best of my understanding and impression, is not going to be negotiated. The resolutions are, but the declaration isn't. So that's why, like a number of other countries, there is this inclination whether we should really be trying to avoid this negotiating atmosphere on the outcome document and having it as a chair summary, like the way that we managed to make it a success in UNIA 2, because it really got so carried away that at the end everybody settled. Instead of a resolution, they agreed upon a chair summary. So when I noted the wording of a negotiated outcome document being said on the videotape by the president, it really gave me again the same signal that whether we are going to fall to the same trap as we trap in terms of time, as in, not the content. So it is critically important to ensure that it is going to be inspirational, it is going to be the type of vision that would be very much forward looking, giving us orientation rather than very committal to the extent of its words and the content. The second point, Mr. Chair, dear colleagues, that I'm going to raise is you very much appreciate that about a quarter century ago, our predecessors and some of the people over here participated in the Rio Summit, where we discussed the sustainable development definition in all these different dimensions and the principles of Rio, such as the equity and the common but differentiated responsibilities with respective capabilities, we are very much faithful to. In all the developing countries that whilst in bracket in Asia and Pacific, the majority of which are developing countries, are very genuinely following the development path and desiring to become developed, and whilst at the same time they've got to provide the large bulk of the raw materials as well as the large bulk of the products of the entire international community, developed as well as developing alike. So it will be just fair and equitable to put more emphasis, as I strongly recommend, to adhere to the Rio principles of equity and CBDRRC, common but differentiated responsibilities, with respective capabilities of different parties to the United Nations and different countries within Asia and Pacific, and to expect for the technology transfer, capacity building, and provisions of adequate financial resources for them to be able to stay on the very sustainable path of development, to be able to continue their mandates as they have been doing all along. So I and my delegation are of the opinion that we should certainly ensure that we remain very faithful to the Rio principles as we go along, to expect for that to be adequately reflected and also followed and emphasized in the forthcoming UNIA 3. I thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Singapore is also requested to make a statement, please.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. I shall try to be brief. As we heard yesterday, Mr. Chair, many in the room stressed the critical nature of addressing pollution, all forms of pollution, including transboundary ones, and the need for the strengthening of intergovernmental cooperation to address them, given that there is no Planet B. We all know that concluding a negotiated outcome is not an easy task, but we should strive and work towards it. Singapore therefore supports a political declaration to demonstrate the collective will and commitment of countries to address pollution. As we mentioned earlier, Mr. Chair, the declaration should be concise, understandable, action-oriented, and meaningful. The declaration should also demonstrate the difference that UNIA can make to people's everyday lives and be appealing and attractive to the public and the stakeholders. Just one more point, Mr. Chair, before I end off. We note that, and we appreciate the Secretary for putting together a senior officials report, which has been made available to all of us. We want to seek some clarification on the section on draft resolutions. Our observation is that if someone reading the report for the first time and did not participate in the discussions, reading it suggests that we had a discussion on each resolution specifically, and which was not so as far as I can recall. Most interventions that people from the floor made comprise broad comments about resolutions and concept note, and not to specific resolutions. I think it may be useful to provide a clarification in the chair summary that the Secretariat took the prerogative to group countries' comments according to the most relevant and appropriate draft resolutions or the concept notes. I believe so that doing so would avoid misunderstanding, especially if how it will be interpreted when we go to UNIA. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do I have any other requests from countries who have not made an intervention yet to want to make an intervention? No, I don't see any hands. So I will now move to the other organizations before I come back to China, so that we can come back to, we'll come back to China. Thank you. I first call on ILO to make the intervention. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to congratulate my colleagues at UN Environment for a well-developed and thought-provoking document later on the pollution issues. Allow me to further stress that tackling pollution and improving resource productivity can create new job opportunities at the local level and a just transition to sustainable economies. We have all seen the devastating economic and health consequences of pollution and excessive production of resources, such as plastics, what we call resource intensity or resource saturation, and this has been mentioned several times. It affects our work, our food, our way of life, our families and communities in our cities, our fields, our mountains, and our seas. The only way to tackle this issue is to cooperate and apply good practices region-wide to achieve the ambitious goals that we are discussing at this meeting. And we must inspire the private sector to go beyond the usual, to innovate and contribute. Let me touch on this point. Asia-Pacific region displayed an average youth unemployment of 10.7%, is home to many innovations and young green entrepreneurs who are applying their skills, their creativity, and their hard work to break up the cycle of poverty and create productive jobs that contribute to a just transition to a pollution-free planet. An example of these efforts is showcased here today during this forum, and I congratulate the Secretariat for that. At the ground floor exhibition space, we have a fantastic electric tuk-tuk, not only a symbol of Bangkok's mobility, but also a young SME that have created 40 jobs for young Thai women and men to help manufacture clean air. Let's follow this example. Turn down the pollution machinery we have created and turn up solutions for clean air, because there is a great potential for job creation in doing this. The only kind of jobs that we should focus on is not just any job. Should be good jobs, decent jobs that provide livelihood, protection, and dignity. These jobs, the ILO call them green jobs. We must learn to recognize these opportunities and design strategic environmental policies driven by a decent work agenda. There is an urgent need for green employment policies in issues like prevention of the worst forms of pollution, mitigation, transitioning to resource productivity and clean air practices, and adaptation, waste recycling, reusing of materials, such as plastic. This process of change at work will require the combined efforts of governments and employers and workers through social dialogue, which brings innovation into the process. This new working dynamic argues strongly for thinking in terms of processes to enable the greening of economies and production, rather than a dichotomy between unsustainable, dirty jobs to be discontinued and sustainable, clean ones to be created. Leveraging decent work, as indicated in the Sustainable Development Goal 8, would accelerate that process by coupling productive activities and environmental production. Let me finish by saying that jobs are not decent by default. They are decent by design. And this is really our work and where we can contribute. As we focus on achieving the high ambitions to have a pollution-free planet, we must, at the same time, turn our efforts and attention to create jobs that are decent, jobs that have quality, jobs that develop our human capital with the skills for today and tomorrow's employability of Asia-Pacific workforce. The ILO will continue to partner with our UN colleagues and countries in the region to achieve a just transition. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I now will call on the civil society organizations to make their statements. We don't have very much time. We want to proceed with the next panel for discussion, so I urge the delegations to make your statements brief and concise. I first call on Mr. Alan Silayan from Clean Air Asia to make his statement, please. Thank you.
I'm sorry that Mr. Alan Silayan is not here in this room, and I will take his place. I am Marjorie Pamintuan of the Asia Pacific Research Network, and I also represent the APRSM and the CSOs in the, I also represent the NGOs in the CSO forum. So the NGOs and CSOs in general have been actually notorious in pointing out how you need to do your job. But our main intention, however, is to ensure that the most vulnerable and the marginalized are cared for in terms of their basic needs for clean air, water, health, and among others in our strive to achieve sustainable development and a pollution-free region. We would like to extend our invitation towards a greater integration and collaboration. We call for the integration of the commonly separated disciplines and departments, and it will increasingly be important to be aware of the interrelatedness of these issues such as climate change, soils, waste, air pollution, health, forests, indigenous peoples, etc. We therefore urge for a more collaborative engagement between governments and NGOs and also marginalized sectors at all levels. Indeed, a pollution-free planet cannot be done without inclusive and meaningful participation of civil society and marginalized sectors. However, this cannot be done if meaningful spaces for CSO engagement and participation are shrinking and even closing down at both national and regional levels. While we truly appreciate the spaces given to us in this meeting, we lament that these opportunities are few and oftentimes are not available. Also, in many countries in the region, communities opposing destructive and pollutive industries such as mining and plantations suffer doubly from the poisoning of their environment as well as from repression through military actions. Only in this region, we have 61 environmental defenders killed. On the other hand, spaces for corporations to influence government policies, including those on fighting pollution and sustainable development, are increasing through secretive free trade agreements such as the RCEP and TPP and the promotion of public-private partnerships. As already stated from previous discussions, we cannot have a resource-efficient and pollution-free Asia-Pacific without an inclusive approach to development that takes into account those that are directly impacted by environmental degradation. Thank you.
Thank you. I call upon Mr. Julius Kenglet from International Trade Union Confederation. You have the floor.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. I represent the ITUC in the Asia-Pacific Regional CSO Engagement Mechanism. While we heard much about the green economy in the conference, not much was discussed and reflected in the report about what it entails. We should take inclusivity to heart and into policy. Specifically, workers and CSOs envision a people-oriented and participative greening process with a just transition framework that considers compensation, skills training, job placement, social protection, social dialogue, and respect for the rights of workers and the community who will be affected by a shift to a green economy. We hope that Asia-Pacific governments commit to the promotion of green jobs or decent jobs that improve energy and raw materials efficiency, limit greenhouse emissions, minimize waste pollution, protect and restore ecosystems, and support adaptation to the effects of climate change. Mr. Chair, a resource-efficient and pollution-free Asia will not come into fruition without workers who will build an environment-friendly and resource-efficient society for us and with us. Workers have long been the first ones to be exposed to hazards and pollutants, as the first liners in manufacturing, agriculture, mining, service, and construction, to name a few sectors. Thus, it is important that governments have national laws, policies, systems, and programs on occupational safety and health in the environment. As we conduct the summit, the World Occupational Safety and Health Congress has just wrapped up in Singapore. The global economic impact of the failure to adequately invest in occupational safety and health is roughly equal to the total GDP of the poorest 130 countries in the world, according to the ILO Director General. Thus, the new global estimates on work-related illnesses and injuries represent 3.94% of global GDP per year, or $2.99 trillion US. In human lives, that means 2.78 million workers continue to die each year from work-related injuries and illnesses. 2.4 million of these deaths can be attributed to work-related diseases alone, where exposure to hazards and pollutants could be attributed. Basic principles such as assessing occupational risks or hazards, combating these at source, and developing a national preventive safety and health culture are important. These are reflected in ILO Convention 187, the Occupational Safety and Health Framework Convention, which, if ratified, can open international cooperation. Training is also important, and it should extend to workers. Safety and health and environment standards inspection is also crucial as we go green. Workers and CSOs are more than willing to help the authorities as deputized inspectors or monitors to help them cover multinational corporations and their supply chains. Occupational Safety, Health, and Environment Committees should be established in all enterprises with the meaningful participation of workers through trade unions. Lastly, government should also be willing to give protection for workers, whistleblowers, who will expose corporate practices that harm the environment and sacrifice the safety, health, and lives of their workers and the community. Greening the economy entails green jobs and decent work under a just transition framework. We can't build a resource-efficient and pollution-free Asia-Pacific if the builders are sick and injured, or worse, if they are dead. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I call now Ms. P. Surya from Sahanivasa.
Thank you, Chair. I speak in behalf of Sahanivasa, based in India, and Asia Pacific Regional CSO Engagement Mechanism. We thank you for the opportunity provided to us to speak about our concerns in the Ministerial Summit. However, we remain disappointed with how governments and stakeholders see us, the most marginalized of our sectors, and the development we want. In our communities, we experience displacements due to large-scale corporate and even public projects such as mega dams, extractive industries, chemical-intensive agro plantations, coastal conversions for commercial development, among others. After years of deliberating on the issue of the environment, the governments and the UN and stakeholders still fail to address the fundamental root causes of these problems as it continued to persist and worsening. We would like to reiterate our critical points raised in this forum that we, representatives of civil society groups, grassroots communities, and development actors in our own ways, send the strongest opposition to the promotion and adoption of green economy as the solution to the issues of pollution and resource efficiency in the region. From Rio 20, our message is clear that this is greenwashing of the corporate capture of the people's natural resources. We also send strong concerns on the promotion of public-private partnerships, as in our countries in the South, this is being done without genuine public consultations and oftentimes at the pursuit of profit between the corrupt government officers and big businessmen. PPPs can be observed in coastal conversions and reclamations, large-scale infrastructures, as well as urban and rural commercial developments, which does not just contribute to people's displacements, but also degradation and destruction of existing local ecosystems and biodiversity. We are also concerned that the polluter pays and corporate accountability principle is also still missing in the discourse, as well as the principle of intergenerational equity. The firm also fails to recognize other pollution sources such as genetic modification technologies, extractives, as well as militarism, particularly that of the United States with its pivot to the Asia Pacific. We also heard a lot about technology, but not about access and control of peoples to these technologies and the recognition of indigenous knowledge and innovations. We would also like to demand for participatory assessment of available and the new technologies in the region. Lastly, we are also disappointed that still the peoples and communities are not fully recognized as partners for development. We demand for more space of engagement on the principle of self-organizations, such as multi-stakeholders dialogues, as well as the opportunities to participate in the discussion, which is beyond just delivering statements. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. May I now call Ms. Mina Bilgi from Woken? You have the floor.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak on behalf of the women constituency at the Asia Pacific Regional Civil Society Engagement Mechanism. While noting that the environmental pillar of sustainable development is a key driver for human health, the theme towards a pollution-free planet is a welcome idea, as the world is now at a crisis point where all forms of pollution pose a grave threat to human health and human life. The health of women and men is affected differently by pollution, and we need to understand the biological factors and gender roles in order to find solutions. The most vulnerable to pollution are women and children, as exposure to persistent and hormone-disrupting pollutants in early years leads to irreversible damage and adverse effects on reproductive health. Therefore, they need protection. Women have a key role in conservation as they hold traditional knowledge associated with natural resources. The contribution from women-led initiatives in combating pollution and their role in decision-making at all levels needs to be recognized, as their impacts have been more effective. Further, restrictive laws relating to freedom of association and speech have curtailed the capacity of women's rights movements to do their work in some countries of Asia-Pacific region. The fact is that all forms of pollution, air, both indoor and outdoor, soil and water, are disproportionately affecting women and children throughout their life cycle. Achieving Agenda 2030 will depend on the existence of powerful, resourced, connected women rights movements as well as other social movements. The outcome of this summit should take into account the close interlinkages among issues in pollution across ecosystems. This should be a basis for actionable proposals such as mechanism for participatory and multi-sectoral assessment of technologies that will involve the government, civil society, and all sectors to ensure that these will not cause pollution and will promote resource-efficient and healthy environment for all. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think we have finished with all the list of requests that's been made to make intervention. Now I come back to a delegation from China who has requested to make intervention. China, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Giving me floor again. This time I just catch the step. Thank you. First, I would like to share some of the points has been raised out by our Singapore colleagues with regard to the agenda item with the draft resolutions. If I make mistakes, probably our colleague from Dr. Sahak, you can correct me. Those solutions, draft solutions, is submitted to Union 3 in Nairobi. Is that correct? If so, and the draft report here of the meeting, something message was different reflected here. If we look at the draft report of paragraph 22, the last sentence, if I read the text, it was like this. A number of issues and priorities from the region was identified for consideration in the United Nations Environment Assembly under those resolutions. They included the following. By understanding the text here, that means those draft resolutions is from this region. Is this correct? But the fact is those solutions, draft solutions, proposals for draft solutions is submitted to Nairobi directly. Or only one or two draft proposals has been submitted to here. This is the first one, clarification. I need a clarification. Second one is, I would like to point out, has already pointed out by Singapore delegation, that those draft solutions has not been discussed substantially here. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, from delegation from China, I will ask the Secretary to take up your points and come back, revert to. Okay, Secretary is asked to clarify the points.
Just a brief clarification is that, with your permission, Excellency, is that the four resolutions from four different countries on four different aspects, it was submitted to the Secretariat in Nairobi, Secretary of the governing bodies. And those are global resolutions, and with a request that every region should discuss and receive inputs at the regional consultation process. It will be very useful, and that's why Excellency Raja is here also to take those messages forward from here to, again, to the Nairobi process, in the intersession process. So 4 were submitted in the Secretary of the governing bodies. These were circulated to all the member states globally, and with a request that any of the ministerial forum at the regional level is a good place to have some kind of inputs around those resolutions, because these are global concerns. The issues are global concerns like marine litters and momentary health. One resolution, the last one from Philippine, government of Philippines, that is also submitted to the Secretary of the governing body in Nairobi, but because whatever we have included, whatever was circulated, we tabled it here. Because whatever not submitted, we cannot do that. So, but only one at the moment available from our region, which is Philippine government of Philippines, and that was also briefly discussed during that. So total at the moment 5 were circulated globally, and we compiled it, discussed it here, and for the regional inputs. And Dr. Excellency Raja is here, Ambassador Raja is here to take back those key messages from here. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think there may be some drafting issue here. So when you read the text, it can create the impression, as you have pointed out, that these, as if these resolutions are emanating from the discussions here, which is actually, I think, not the intention, as has been clarified also. So what it says here in paragraph 22, and let this be part of the record if there is a subsequent misunderstanding, is that the resolutions which have been tabled or which have come forth in Nairobi, under those resolutions or related to those resolutions, maybe if we say related to those resolutions, it will be more clear, a number of issues and priorities from the region were identified. And then it spells it out that in the draft resolution on marine litter and microplastics proposed by Norway, some points were made during the deliberations here. And this is something that needs to be taken into consideration, and then it goes on about the other. So the concerns and points that were raised have been spelled out as kind of, emerging from the discussions here in Bangkok. That's my understanding. The Secretariat can confirm or otherwise. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. We'll ask the Secretary to make the necessary editorials and then bring back to the delegations who hope to have resolution before we end this conference. Thank you. I think we are making very good time, and I think we can then reward ourselves with a short tea break. We come back in about 15 minutes for 10:40 sharp for the session on the panel that will be led by Dr. Paha to proceed after the tea break at 10:40. Thank you very much.
is going to change. But it doesn't work. It's different circuits. Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention? The session is about to start, so if you kindly can take your seats so that the session can begin. Thank you.
Distinguished delegates, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we will start with the next session. This will be a session to discuss distinguish panelists into a session towards a pollution-free planet. This will be moderated by His Excellency Dr. Ramon J.P. Pahe, Vice President for Asia Pacific United Nations Environment Assembly. And I call Dr. Pahe to take the seat, please. Thank you. And the rest of the panels, please. The panels will be introduced by Mr. Dr. Pahe. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor for me to moderate this ministerial dialogue. This ministerial dialogue on policy's perspective on a pollution-free planet will provide an opportunity for the ministers, heads of delegations, and other stakeholders to engage in an interactive dialogue with the panel to share their perspectives on how to achieve a pollution-free planet by 2030. Discussions will highlight contributions and commitments to achieve the vision reflected in the theme of the 2017 United Nations Environment Assembly towards a pollution-free planet. It is my honor to introduce the distinguished panelists. We have His Excellency Mr. Lee Min-ho, Deputy Minister, Ministry of Environment, Republic of Korea. His Excellency Mr. Tai-Fu Lemmy, Associate Minister, Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment, Samoa. Supposedly, Mr. Syed Abu Ahmad Akif, Federal Secretary, Pakistan. And Ms. Laxmi Diwanti, Senior Advisor, Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources, Indonesia. May I call on Mr. Akif if he is here? Okay, let me proceed. The flip side of the impressive economic growth in Asia Pacific has witnessed over the last few decades is increasing levels of pollution and depletion of natural resources. We can move from this vicious circle to a virtuous circle where economic growth, jobs, improvement in public health, reduced poverty, and gender equality are linked with a more sustainable management of pollution and environmental resources. For this transformation to take place, a shift is needed to develop more coherent and comprehensive set of cross-sectoral policy frameworks. These policies we also need to align with necessary prerequisites such as green technologies, financing mechanisms, and stakeholders' engagement. However, the policies itself may not help the national and local governments to achieve the targets of pollution-free countries and cities. The implementation of policies is viewed as a much bigger challenge than formulating these policies. The consolidated partnership among and between public and civil society entities, including the private sector, can be useful to achieve these goals. It also responds to the need for enhanced regional partnership to support the implementation of sustainable development goals. Moreover, targeted interventions can be both based on global and regional environmental agreements or action beyond this to address the most pressing challenges in transforming cities, countries, and the region to be pollution-free. Welcome, Mr. Keith. Let me now call on Mr. Lee, our first panelist, and he will tackle the topic, how regulations can be a safeguard against pollution and incentivize the innovations and solutions. Mr. Lee, please.
Thank you, Chair Ramon Paye. I am very pleased to join this panel on the policy perspectives on the theme of UNEA 3. Let me begin by offering my answer to your question on how regulations can help solutions and safeguard against pollution. I think I can start with the case of environmental legislations. Until early 1990s, less than about 10 environmental laws were equipped in Korea. But with increasing demand of the society on high environmental quality, we now about 60 environmental laws under the Ministry of Environment. Now the environmental quality in Korea shows a far improved situation compared with that of early 1990s. Statistical figures on water and air quality and waste generation has been improved a lot, although we still areas to go further. I would like to take two examples of successful environmental regulations in Korea. First one is on waste. In 1995, the government of the Republic of Korea introduced the volume-based waste fee system to reduce waste and maximize recycling. Before this system, we charged a fixed fee regardless the amount of waste per household. The volume-based waste fee system had a far-reaching effect. For a decade after the implementation of this system, average municipal solid waste generation was reduced by 23% in 10 years. It has also changed the public awareness of waste disposal and our production and consumption pattern. I think this would affect the effective use of resources somehow. My second point about our example is on air quality. Until 1990s, sulfur dioxide, namely SOx, coming from industry and car emissions was the major causes of air pollution in Korea. However, the SOx dramatically decreased after 1990s. The reason was a combination of tighter emission standards, limiting the sulfur contents in fuel. In 2003, we also enacted a special act on the improvement of air quality in Seoul metropolitan area. Key components of the special act is to introduce cap and trade system for SOx and NOx or nitrogen oxide and particulate matters. And we also adjusted the relative price of diesel to gasoline. The special act is also meaningful because it was an outcome of various stakeholders' engagement. More than 200 debates took place through various committees, public hearings, seminars, and conferences. As a result of this act, the SACS and NOx levels were dropped dramatically in Seoul area. Although we have examples of successful pollution-reducing regulations, as I explained, there are a few emerging issues. One is particulate matter in Korea. As you are aware, the WHO, World Health Organization, announced PM 2.5 and 10 as carcinogenic to human beings in 2013. In Korea, we started to apply the PM 2.5 environmental standards since 2015 and provide monitoring results to the public. Since then, Korean people started to have a greater concern over particulate matter. Recently, there are a number of causes of PM identified. Those are climate change-related factors, transboundary particulate matters from outside of Korean Peninsula, and car emissions, especially from diesel cars, and lastly, old-style coal-fired power plants. So now the governments are establishing comprehensive countermeasures that include stricter regulations on coal-powered plants, car emissions, and industrial emissions, especially for NOx, and introduction of cap and trade system for particulate matters for major industrial areas. The Republic of Korea is working together with the neighboring countries to conduct a joint monitoring of air pollution. The tripartite cooperation between Korea, China, and Japan on scientific research is also underway. Between Korea and China, a joint pilot project is underway in the areas of steel mills and thermal power plants. Our cooperation with neighboring countries is very important, as we have seen in projects such as ASEAN Haze Action. Chemical management is another important area for us, as we went through the tragic accident on humidifier disinfectant, which brought thousands of victims from 2000 to 2012. We have significantly strengthened the registration and evaluation framework for chemicals as a precautionary approach. Among all the chemicals, biocides will be strictly controlled by the government so that only the biocide with prior approval can be used. Finally, I would like to share with you a couple of lessons we learned so far. First, we regard Korea have strong legal and institutional frameworks, but implementing these laws and policies is another issue. Compared to the frameworks we have, I believe our implementation still needs improvements on many fronts. So one thing we should remember is implementation. Second, issue related to decentralization of the government system. Since the decentralization of our governance system, most enforcement powers moved to local governments. Unfortunately, some growth-oriented local governments consider the implementation of environmental laws not very important. They end up sometimes being in conflict with the central governments. So before enforcing the laws and the regulations, it seems essential to share common values between the central and the local governments. In this process, citizens' participation can do a pivotal role. Finally, environment should be mainstreamed in all decision and policy-making process, as many distinguished delegates stressed during our session. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Let me now call on His Excellency, Mr. Lemmy, who will address the topic on how to identify practical policies and practices across the globe and suggests the mechanisms to localize these policies and practices, including technical solutions. Sir Lemmy, please.
Thank you, moderator, and talofa to Your Excellencies and distinguished delegates. First, let me thank UNEP for taking a strong position towards a pollution-free planet, and we take note that a pollution-free Asia-Pacific will contribute significantly to achieving this goal. As small island nations, we are especially vulnerable to pollution. And we know that social and economic developments and are the major drivers behind environmental pollution, including air, land, water, and ocean. What we do not know for sure is the extent to which our natural resources are being contaminated and the extent to which the health of our communities are being affected because of pollution. To this point, I think it points directly to a lack of data because we do not have the means, the finances, the technology, or the technical capacity needed to analyze and manage water and chemicals in all forms and throughout their life cycles. We note that the priorities of small island developing states are clearly articulated in the Samoa pathway, and we reiterate the need for sound management of waste and chemicals. At the second UNEA session last year, the sixth resolution on role, functions, and modality for UNEP implementation of Samoa pathway as a means for facilitating achievement of the SDGs was approved. We would like to see support from UNEP in implementation of this resolution, and we call upon UNEP to develop MOUs at the sub-regional level to clearly identify specific countries' priorities that will be supported in the context of this resolution and the mean with which to implement these priorities. To date, Samoa has ratified the Rotterdam Convention, Stockholm Convention, PESOL and Waikani Conventions, Chemical Weapon Convention, the Minamata Convention on Mercury, the Biological Weapon Convention, the Vienna Convention, and the Montreal Protocol. The 2030 Development Agenda, as well as the convention, treaties, and agreement that we have exceeded are domesticated and incorporated into our national development frameworks, such as the Statement of Development Strategies, and into sectors and other national plans. Under its National Environment Sector Plan 2017-2021, Samoa hopes to improve management of solid waste through implementation of waste minimization strategies, improve the management of wastewater, chemicals, and hazardous waste, including healthcare waste, address management of e-waste, and strengthen air quality monitoring. These include development of the necessary policy and legislative framework, strengthening of institutional arrangement, including institutional capacity building and necessary infrastructure and technology to facilitate monitoring of pollution. Samoa has passed relevant legislation that prohibits the importation of plastic bags and prohibits the importation of used vehicles beyond 8 years old. At the international level, Samoa supports the 3R concept of reduce, reuse, recycle. And as a small and isolated island state, we support the proposed 4th R, which stands for return. As we head toward a zero waste strategy, promoting circular economy in achieving the resource-efficient Asia-Pacific under the 2030 Development Agenda. Samoa embraces the Spirit-driven Cleaner Pacific 2025 strategy, which integrates strategic action addressing priority waste and pollution issues and incorporate lessons learned from the implementation of previous regional strategies that it replaces. Samoa is well into the process of replacing ozone-depleting substances such as HCFC, and was supportive of the proposed amendment to the Montreal Protocol to phase out HFC and replace it with natural refrigerant such as HC, which is not only ozone-friendly, but does not contribute to global warming. With the Pacific Ocean holding the largest tuna stock in the world, we are definitely monitoring development in the refrigeration and air conditioning industry to ensure sustainability. Finally, Chair, we acknowledge the support from UNEP over the years. We note the establishment of the UNEP Pacific Sub-Regional Office has strengthened collaboration with UNEP on the ground and strengthened coordination with SWEP and the Pacific region. We urge UNEP to continue building up the capacity of this office and to work closely with SWEP, other relevant agencies and development partners to provide targeted and coordinated assistance to countries in particular in small island nations to ensure sound management of chemical waste throughout their life cycles. Excellency, there is no limit to development. It is a positive thing. We just have to do it responsibly and make sure that our one and only planet has the capacity to take them all and withstand the related implications and consequences. A pollution-free planet starts from you and me. We have to be responsible for what we do, what we eat, what we wear. It is usually the little things that count. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Lemmy. Thank you very much, Mr. Lee. Let me now go to the third topic. What makes financial institutions, private sector, invest in transformative technologies? By Mr. Akif.
Thank you very much. First of all, Chair, fellow members, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'm grateful to UN Environment Program, Asia and the Pacific Office for inviting me to be on the panel. I had been told that I would be required to speak here. That was about a week ago, and I had forgotten all about it until about 3 minutes ago. So I'm sure there's a need to remind the speakers a night before, or at least on the morning. So, but of course, I mean, the need to have a pollution-free planet by 2030 is of critical importance. How to achieve that planet? Yes, we realize that my task is very uphill in a country which is 210 million people, of whom 50% are under 25, and something like 30 million children are out of school. So our figures are quite staggering, you see. So, but I'm an optimist, and even though the task is big and uphill and the resources are quite minimal, but as someone said, that all charity must begin at home. So I have asked my Environmental Protection Agency Director General to start prosecuting somebody in the Secretary's office, because it will make a very good news story if the Secretary is prosecuted for a plastic bag. So, but she is generally not willing to prosecute me, and but we're trying. So coming back to question number 3, is it number 3 or which is the question? I think it's 4, financial institutions?
Yes, it's, your topic is financial institutions. Yes.
Okay. I mean, financing transformative technologies often comes with a higher risk that makes such investments unattractive for financial institutions in the private sector. We need to de-risk the investments that aim to combat pollution by underwriting the risk which is related to the losses by the government. And the government entities can sort of de-link that risk and make the private sector invest in transformative technologies. We have tried to bring in banks as accredited entities on the GCF, and so we have got some of the 2 of the 3 major banks which are now in the process of becoming accredited entities, so that global and green finance can flow through the commercial banks. So the de-risking tools that I was talking about include public-private partnerships, green bonds, the creation of a quasi-public institutions that work with private sector to spur innovation, among others. And there are a number of tools that we have been talking about in Pakistan. Pakistan has got some renewable sector. I mean, only last month, almost 300 megawatts of private sector wind power has come on board. So this was because this only possible because of a public-private partnership, because the private sector was unable to really have the transmission lines. And we have got new power purchase agreements. We have got a special institution which buys private sector power and puts it into the public sector. So I mean, it's essentially the government which will have to take the lead. We have got a lot of investments which is coming in into the, we have established the Pakistan Climate Change Authority, and together we have established the Pakistan Climate Change Fund. ADB has already contributed $200 million to the Disaster Risk Management Fund. And we are also working on having insurance policies which will, because there's a lot of willingness and ability to pay for the insurance. So we've got several financial and innovative schemes to have these combat pollutions. We are bringing in the private sector. The capital now is almost plastic free, in the sense that most of the formal sector at least is now biodegradable. So we are trying to do our bit, and essentially all charity must begin at home, and so we need to put our own house in order. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Akif. Our last panelists will talk about the topic on how to build local capability for homegrown scientific evidence leading to innovation and solutions. Ms. Lakshmi, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for the opportunity given to me to join this panel, sharing policy perspective on moving toward the pollution-free planet agenda. And it is also my pleasure to witness the spirit and commitment made by everybody of us here in this region, addressing a very timely, pertinent issues of environmental pollution. So unlike Mr. Akif, I've just been told to be the panelist last night. So but I'm very happy to be here. Yeah, with regard to your question, and also allow me to also address the fourth question on the financial issue later on. Yeah, for Indonesia, ensuring the balance of environmental and economic development, it's a matter of national survival. Because being blessed with a rich abundance of natural resources, indeed we have a very great responsibility to ensure that the natural resources, as well as the pollution-free ecosystem, is there and in a place for the livelihood for the people. And along with its economic achievement, the environmental agenda has made significant advances. Environmental regime has grown. We started our environmental regime since the Stockholm Convention back in 1972. So since then, we have the environmental, the first ever environmental act in Indonesia. The environmental regime has grown since then. For example, management of conservation and biodiversity, on climate change, on forestry management, on air pollution, on waste management, and also plastic and marine litter. So currently, we are undertaking a robust policy and initiatives. So, however, let me focus my share on this agenda in two themes. One is the plastic, marine litter, and water pollution, water and air pollution. So you mentioned about the science, evidence, and citizen awareness. So indeed, in developing our policy, science and evidence and all data, it's crucially important, because we cannot have our policy without that data. and we cannot achieve what we cannot measure. So it's important to have the science and evidence in developing our policy, as well as in implementation stage of the policy. Let me share you some evidence and data why marine litter agenda is very important for Indonesia. So Indonesia is a marine nation, and being the world's largest archipelagic country, our sea hosts vast biodiversity, oil and gas, corals, mangrove, and etc., with significant economic and social benefit. On the other side, having over 70,000 islands, of which over 2,000 are inhabited, the litter of our over 250 million population have access to the sea through numerous rivers. We have hundreds of rivers in Indonesia. Thus, our marine litter comes from both marine activities and more significantly from inland activities. So, based on that data, we are aware that the amount of the marine waste through to the ocean is very challenging. And we also learned that around 15% of the litter is in the form of the plastic. So faced by the such challenges, Indonesia has undertaken various policy. So again, the policy is made from the scientific base as well as the level of awareness and level of capacity of not only government but also the non-government entities. For example, currently, waste management is one of the priorities of the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, among other priorities, of course. And our strategic plan set the target to reduce waste generation at its source by 20% and to manage 75% of current waste within 5 years in 380 cities. To that end, we certainly promote the triple-R, reduce, reuse, recycle campaign. But I do like the fourth R just introduced by our colleagues Lemmy from Samoa, the fourth R, which is a return. Yeah, we have a very intensive campaign on this regard, and also the development of a local initiative of the waste bank or trust bank, as well as the investment or waste to energy conservation or waste to energy initiatives. We also have been awarding Green and Clean City Awards for the local governments since 1986. It's just to give the incentive for the local government to better dealing with their waste management issues. But nowadays, it's not only for the waste management issues, but other issues like waste and air pollution, water and air pollution. We also installed solid waste trap in some of the major rivers and undertaken coral reef as well as national park cleanup program, including the cleanup the coral reef underwater. We also continue to promote the involvement of broad participation of the people, because awareness and participation is indeed a very significant and essential for the successful of the implementation. So, through declaration of the Indonesian movement of the Plastic Care 2020, signed by more than 30 local governments and enterprises, aiming to create green and better society of the 3R, no, I should call it 3R plus R, which is 4R. And the theme of less plastic, more fantastic, that is applied through the rule of the pay for plastic bag effectively since February last year. As regard to the waste to energy conservation, we target to facilitate at least 40 cities and make 80% of industrial biomass as an alternative energy in 2019. We also support initiatives from the communities to establish trash bank or waste bank to reduce the waste, because we noticed that this initiative, it's not only for managing the waste within the local, but it could also link with other initiatives. For example, in East Java, in Malang, a city in East Java, there are a doctor who initiate the trust bank, and he made a link between the trust bank with the micro health insurance. So the people, the community could pay for the health insurance through the trust bank. We also have another initiative to link with the trust bank and for the electricity. They can pay their electricity through the trust bank. So it's really not only environmental benefit we are gaining, but we also gain economic as well as social benefit from the initiative. So our government is trying its best to implement the commitments. However, the awareness and attitude play important roles for its success. We have the 10YFP, the 10-year framework of program of sustainable consumption and production, launched several years ago. And now we move toward the stage of walking the talk, sorry, walking the talk. So we provide guidance, incentive for the society to move and to changing the unsustainable consumption pattern. We also of the view that private sector and community contribution is important to the attainment of our target and objective, particularly in developing the circular economy. So the Ministry of Environment and Forestry endorsed the alliance to work with our National Board for Waste Management, a multi-stakeholders consultative forum to support sound decision making. So later today at 2 p.m., there will be 2 youths from Indonesia to share their inspirational initiative in making Bali, Indonesia, to be a free plastic bag island. So make sure that you will be there and listen to those 2 young, inspiring girls. As reducing for other pollution, continuous effort and initiative has been taking in place since years ago, including the green and green business through, we call it PROPER. It's Program Peringkat Kinerja, or in English, we call it Business Environmental Performance Rating System. This rating system is basically to enhance compliance of the business to the water, air, and hazardous waste emission standard. And again, like the other initiative, we also link this initiative to other financial initiatives. So together and jointly effort with the central banks back 10 years ago, we used the result of the rating system and to be connected to the collectability rate of the companies. So if the companies, because this rating system, we give them color, black to gold. So black, red, blue, green, and gold. So if the companies get 2 times black in a row, because it's yearly, and the bank will give a signal that it will be dangerous for their investment. And the collectability will be dropped to 5, for example. And for those who give green or even gold, the bank is willing to give a reduction in their interest. So, and we continue to move up to this direction. We also have eco-driving for better air quality. Of course, we have policy in place to shift our energy toward the cleaner energy, but also we would like to have community to have a better way in driving their motor vehicles. So eco-driving, it's promoting to have more contribution in air quality. We try our best to integrate all the instruments into our environmental policy, because we believe that environmental is not a single sector. Environmental is always comprised with other factors, social, economic, and other factors. So we try our best to integrate more instruments into our policy. Since the beginning of our regime in 1982. The new Act number 32 years 2009, even promote more instrument. And in this occasion, I would like to share one of the instruments that now we are focusing in develop and implement the instrument. It's so-called environmental economic instrument. And this economic instrument as important as other instruments. And the Act stipulated mandate to government and local government to develop and to implement economic instrument. We recognize the economic instrument into three categories. First is economic instrument for the planning process or planning stage. It's include and internalized externalities, environmental economic valuation into the natural resources, natural capital, and other, including the green GDP and green regional GDP. The second category is environmental economic to provide fund for the environmental management protection activities. So similar to the experience from the Pakistan, we also developed many various schemes in financing our environmental protection and management activities. The third category is economic instrument in form of incentive and disincentive. We have the sound environmental taxation, including the duty-free exemption for the sound technology imported, subsidies, and other type of taxation. We also have the, we call it payment for ecological services or compensation to make the environmental services being better value and respected. We also have environmental labeling, tradable permit, and other type of economic incentive. So one of the examples that I would like to share in this regard, that since mid-1990s, we introduced the soft loan program on pollution abatement equipment. It was a joint program with Japan through the OECF at the time, and then JBIC later on. We also have another scheme, industrial efficiency and pollution control. So up to now, we have 5 soft loan schemes. It varied from for medium, small, micro, up to the large scale of the enterprises. We even able to implement a debt for netto swap scheme to incentivizing environmental investment. So back few years ago, it's a bilateral partnership with Germany. We able to swap our debt and make the use of the money to intensify the micro, small, and medium enterprises. So then the micro and small, medium enterprises able to address their environmental pollution. Because in Indonesia, this group of enterprises, well, although individually they already discharge a small amount of pollution, but in total, if you multiply with millions of SMEs in Indonesia, it's very significant. So reducing from this sector is very important. So, and to add the ongoing initiative, just recently, our National Authority of Financial Services launched so-called roadmap and regulation on the sustainable financing. So they also even have already finished the first pilot project. We call it first movers. So there are 8 big banks in Indonesia who already invest and willing to more invest in financing the environmental related investment. This roadmap and regulation would strengthen role and affirmative action of the financial institution, not only bank, but also other financial institutions like insurance, equities, and other, to have more roles in the natural resources and efficient and environmental management. I think that's all that I would like to share. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Lakshmi. And I would like to thank all the distinguished panelists. This is a very disciplined panelist. We're on the dot. We're on the dot. We have 30 minutes. This is supposed to be interactive. This is a dialogue. We will be inviting you later on to comment or to please make your statements. And we have up to 12 noon, so we still have 28 minutes. So, but let me summarize somehow. Mr. Lee has noted that Korea has an impressive 60 national laws on environment. He outlined some of the success stories in enacting strict regulations to fight pollution, giving us examples relating to waste management and air quality. He reminded us that although having environmental laws is important, the key challenge is actually implementation. That's good. Mr. Lemmy stressed the special priorities of small island developing states. He shared Samoa's commitments to the 3 R's, but reminded us that there is a 4th R, that is return. He reminded us that there is no limit to development, but that we do it responsibly, and it's usually the little thing that counts. Mr. Akif has shared his view that we need to de-risk investments to enable private sector funds to come in. He gave good examples of some instruments, including green bonds, public-private partnership, and even insurance. And lastly, Ms. Laxmi shared powerful examples, very powerful examples, from Indonesia, highlighting efforts and challenges to address marine litter and other sources of pollution. So let me now open the floor for comments. You can direct your comments or questions to the panelists. And we have, as I said, we have time for this up to 12 noon. But at 12 noon, whether there are still speakers or not, I have to stop because the secretariat told me we will be booted out here if we don't stop. So we have activities at 12 noon. But before I call on anyone, let me share with you a very small observation. I've been observing the discussion for the past 4 days, and you can feel it. There is substantial, not so much, but substantial skepticism on the theme pollution-free planet. Don't worry, keep it there, because I'll share with you, I have the same. As Minister of Environment for 6 years in the Philippines, I also thought that it is impossible to achieve a pollution-free planet. But since last year, when we were crafting this theme in UNEA, especially after the 2 retreats we have done in October last year and 1 retreat last June, one in Nairobi and one in Costa Rica, I am pretty convinced that a pollution-free planet is attainable. And I'm saying this to put it on record so that 50 years hence, our children and children's children will know that 50 years ago, we are doing it for them. Most of us will not be here 50 years hence, but at least we did it for them. It is not impossible. I tell you, it is achievable. And we can point out a lot of evidence. It is achievable. I'll tell you one example. In Manila, 80% of the pollution is coming from mobile sources. 80%. That is coming from cars. 80%. If you go to developed countries now, especially Europe and United States, there is so much success on electric cars. You can just imagine if tomorrow we replace all the cars in Manila with electric cars. That is an 80% success, right? From 80% to 0. So it is achievable. I was in Costa Rica last June. Costa Rica, although it's a small country indeed, is 99% renewable in terms of power source. It is achievable. I was not convinced myself. I have so many questions. A few years ago, especially when I was minister for 6 years, I said, as of environment in the Philippines, I also had so many questions. That's why I'm asking you not to change yourself, not to change your views. Keep your skepticisms, because that will make us move forward. If we all agree now that pollution-free planet is attainable, we will all be complacent. But if you have questions, we will continue to address your questions. So please, let me now give the floor to everyone. First, we will ask the delegates to speak, as the Secretariat told me, to follow the rules. And then later on, the UN organization, the multilateral institutions. Then we will call the civil society. I'm sorry for that. I don't want to violate the rules. I want to call you now, but if you are the only one, I'll call you now. Anyone? Oh, so please, Bangladesh, please.
Thank you, Excellency, and we sincerely appreciate the panelists for providing very insightful and eloquent presentations. My point is that we are talking about phasing out the plastics, use of plastics, but we have to be mindful of the fact that we have to provide the replacement or good alternatives as opposed to plastics. For instance, in my country, we banned on using the polyethylene or polypropylene shopping bags almost 10 years ago. We've been trying to enforce this ban on using the polythene shopping bags, but frankly speaking, we are not fully successful since we couldn't provide the alternatives to the people. And for instance, if you consider the kitchen markets or fish markets, where if you want to carry the raw fish, what would be the alternative as opposed to plastics or polythene shopping bags? So we need to have something available for the citizens they can use for kitchen shopping or for fish or something like that. So I would just request you whether in your country you have a very good example, might be, so please present something that we can actually replicate in our country. Thank you.
I heard this from anyone from you, but I heard this from Indonesia a while ago. Ms. Azmi, can you respond to that? Please.
Yeah, thank you, colleagues from Bangladesh. I think we in Indonesia, we also share the challenges and that situation. In facing out something, we have to be ready with the substitution, with other alternative. And again, the alternative, it's not only in terms of technology, but we also need to have alternative incentive scheme and others. In Indonesia, when we start to deal with this issue, the marine litter, and we start with plastic, as I mentioned in my presentation, we have several parallel initiatives. So campaigning the behaviors in bringing their own shopping bag, for example, till developing the Indonesian national standard on the plastic bag. So we have no a standard for a plastic bag. There are three types of plastic that can introduce. And like other instrument, like other policy, we would like to implement our policy in a stepwise. So of course we have to have the timeline, and then the steps toward that things. We cannot have it in one stage. So the chair just give a spirit of optimistic, and I would like to share the spirit of being patient in environmental field, because we cannot just would like to see the result at once. So yeah, having the national standard for the plastic bag, and currently jointly with Ministry of Finance, we are developing an alternative of putting some duty on the certain plastic type of plastic, so we can charge those who still using the plastic that's harmful to the environment, and moving to the other type of plastic, and giving the collected duty to give the financial incentive to that sectors. And we also introduced this idea to the level of early stage of education. We have Adiwiyata. Adiwiyata is a green school program. So we introduced this awareness to that program. When we start our environmental policy, we simply adopt a simple question from economic. It's supply and demand. So you cannot supply the good services if you don't have a demand from the market. So we create the demand first by educating, campaigning, other things. So they can stand and focalize their needs. We need to have a better plastic bag. We need to have a sound environmental plastic bag. Then the supply side will respond to that. I think the businesses, it simply respond to the demand. So I think supply and demand side, it needs to be well managed in this phasing out stage. But of course, be optimistic, be positive, and be patient.
Be patient. That's correct. Absolutely, Mr. Thank you so much. Let me now call on Iran, and I think after that would be the farmers group, the children and youth, the I'm sorry. China and Thailand. And after that will be farmers, children's, and then NGOs. Yeah. I'm sorry, but let me now call on China, please. Sorry, Iran and China, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Yes, I'll be very brief and continue being patient and optimistic, of course. There are a number of issues that I'd like to raise, but just touch upon them. The key challenge, as Mr. Lee said, is the implementation. It very much depends upon the scope of the problem and the dimension and its complexity. And it remains, to me, the key challenge, the implementation. And you very much appreciate that we have the Sustainable Development Goals in line with Agenda 2030, and we all have plenty at national level, plenty of laws, rules, and regulations that do provide the right path should there be the necessity tools and vehicles for implementing them. The tools and vehicles are very important. And of course, talking about the financial incentives, the insurances, there are schemes that every now and then different countries try to promote them. Even at times, for instance, talking about insurances, it was a really unique initiative in Iran that we insured the farmers against the attacks of the wildlife. For instance, cheetah or panthers, or even at times other wildlife, when they attacked their farmers, there were insurance companies that would insure them. But then again, it remains who pays for the premium. Of course, the government would have to contribute. On the other joint financial schemes that particularly Indonesia enjoyed with Japan, I'd be seeking more views on that. But how would you see the role of environment funds that would offer attractive rates of or concessional rates of financial resources to private enterprises planning to combat their polluting sources, being air coming out of their stacks or effluents or wastewater or even waste themselves. So the role of national environment funds are really inevitable, and that I'd like to seek the views of His Excellency the Minister of Samoa on the potential use of such issues when it comes to circular economy. In effect, I mean, the fourth R, the way that I would understand it, the return, somehow completes the circular economy idea. And following the same skepticism that you indicated, Mr. Moderator, the success rate is incredibly important, and the time that we have available is not only the time, but also the financial resources, because you very well appreciate that within the developing world, a bulk of our priority is to provide the minimum welfare level. Then we really need augmented and additional resources that would have to be provided from different means to ensure that the real planet would be a pollution-free planet that I very much trust, and I hope that much shorter than the middle of the century we'd attain it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. As I said, keep those skepticisms, because even if we fail, but we reduce the pollution by 80%, we still succeed, even if we fail. So let me now call on China, and then I think Thailand, and after that, I have 4 there, I believe. And I was told I can extend, so be happy. I was told by Subrata I can extend for just a little time. China, please.
Thank you. Excellent discussions by the panelists. And I like the pollution-free planet. I like it very much. It gives us confidence. But on realistic, we have to realize that on the ground, the pollution-free planet cannot be realized or cannot be reached overday or overnight. We are going to do it step by step. Let me ask you 2 questions. Our panelists and the moderators picked up as a case you mentioned. One is our moderator said the electric cars used in getting popular in some cities. As my understanding, those electric cars are going to use electricity. The question is where the electricity comes from. Is renewable, or it's from coal, or it's from other resources? This is what we have to consider. If it's from the power from the coal, that means that the electricity used here reduce the emissions from the cars, but the emissions is there. It's about the power plant. So whether this can be avoided, this is a question. Second, with a question to Mr. Lee. In Korea, your government has announced, your president, Won, has announced to reduce the nuclear power to tackle the CO2 emissions. However, where the energy comes from, the substitute for nuclear power, is the eco power or renewable is sufficient for that percentage of nuclear power? This is a question to you. But I talked to a country expert from a European country. It's a big country, have announced several years ago to phase out nuclear power. I talked to an energy expert. He said we can buy electricity from neighboring countries. The neighboring country, 75% is nuclear power. He said, I don't care about that one, whether this is a nuclear power or not. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Imagine putting the electric cars in Costa Rica. That solves your problem, because 99% of the power there is renewable. So that solves it. So if we now shift to that, actually I'm more concerned of the battery, actually. But 2 weeks ago, I got a briefing from a Chinese company, Chinese company producing battery. They're saying, wait for 2 years. We will solve the disposal of the battery, because that's the problem right now, how to dispose the battery. But the battery that we are using now can last 10 years. So we have 8 years to solve the problem, but they're telling me 2 years they'll do it. So there is hope. What I'm saying is, it is achievable. But I'm not changing your mind. Keep it. But I tell you, it is achievable. Let me call Thailand. No. Mr. Lee, please answer.
I think your question is about the reducing nuclear power in Korea. And yeah, you're right. We are discussing the long-term reduction of nuclear power dependency, and we are still under discussion, and we'll follow the citizens' opinions on that. And if we find the alternative for nuclear power, we are thinking about the renewable energy. So we are targeting like 20% of all energy in Korea by 2030. That is our target right now. And we try to see the potential, the renewable power in Korea, and we conclude that it's possible to get the 20% by 2030. So I think still it's possible. And if there is some kind of lack of or the shortage of electricity, the European countries sometimes buy from neighboring countries. I don't know whether in Korea, but anyway, we'll see. And because it will be a very long-term plan, like it takes 60 years. So we just start the first step. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lee. Thailand, please.
Thank you, Excellency Lamon. Thailand just would like to express our appreciation to this platform, and we think that the panelists has done very comprehensive discussion, and it's very interesting for us all to hear what you implement in your country, and for us to achieve the pollution-free planet in the future. For Thailand, we recognize that the pollution matters are beyond only the government. I think that this matter is require multi-level of all stakeholders that to work together. So presently, for the government, we have launched the project on Zero Waste Thailand under the Pracharat mechanism, which means that people and the government to highlight the policies and encourage the public, private, and civil society to work in close collaboration. The government also carried out the urgent plan demanding all local authorities around the country to reduce waste per capita to 5% within this year. The solid waste management is challenging and it involves everyone. So we focus also our strategy on the sustainable consumption and production. And we have developed our SCP roadmap, and we also work on 10 YFP. And also with Thailand, we stand ready to work with at the regional level with ASEAN and Asia Pacific to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal 12, sustainable consumption and production. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thailand. Okay. We cannot close without hearing the invaluable comments from our friends from the civil society. Let me now start with the farmers group, then indigenous peoples, children and youth, and representative NGOs, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Sarojini Rangam from Pesticide Action Network, Asia Pacific, with the Farmers Constituency of the APR-SAM. I would like to thank the distinguished panelists for their very interesting presentations. I have 3 questions. Agriculture continues to be the most important for most of countries here, and people's income, growth, and livelihood security in the developing Asia Pacific is a reality. And the use of highly hazardous pesticides, fertilizers, and genetically engineered organisms on land, water, and air, as well as health of thousands of farmers, their communities, and consumers, as well as environmental contamination is being felt by these substances. And yet we are finding very little discussion on the impact of pollution of these substances. And maybe there could be a further integrated environmental governance and policy involving agriculture. Second question is, yesterday Ms. Akhtar from ESCAP said 12.3% of arable lands in Asia Pacific is moving from smallholders to corporations that are growing or promoting export crops and resource extraction with its inherent pollutions. But what we are seeing on the ground is that this means land grabbing, displacement of the most vulnerable people, women, peasants, indigenous peoples, and they are the most affected. So how does environmental policy development and implementation prevent this? Because we're not seeing that being discussed. Third and final question, we know that there's so much on the ground of farmers' innovations and efforts to not only to reduce the pollution of these substances that I mentioned, but also to ensure resource efficiency by adopting practices like agroecology, organic farming. And as the delegate from Bangladesh talked about the need for alternatives, we feel that these are the alternatives. So my question is, how do we ensure policy support for agroecology and people science, innovations, and efforts are recognized and provided policy financials and financial support? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will take the casuals of answering that later on, even for 1 hour, but after this conference. I will discuss with you, I will approach you. But let me hear first the inputs of the indigenous people, and then later on the children and youth and the NGO. But I'll answer that later on. We can even ask the panelists to discuss this with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank also for the input of our speakers. We heard a lot of on plastic waste. I think it's very easy for us to unite on plastic because we consider it waste. But I lack the discussion on mining and also industrial fishing, like fishing noise pollution from industrial fishing vis-a-vis the support for our small fisher folks. And also on mining, that's really, mining is creating a lot of pollution in our area, but we also understand the dilemma of the government because this is where the economic comes from and the increase in the gross domestic product. So how do you balance these things? Because we really have to also look at the social impact. And another point is I rarely hear still the recognition of the indigenous people's land over their ancestral land territories, because we are also right holders and we have those territories, lands. So we really have to, the recognition for our self-determined development and free prior informed consent is very much important to us. How do we deal with those kinds of things?
I will ask the panelists to respond to it comprehensively. Let me go to the children and youth, please.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, for this opportunity. I am very grateful that you are being so kind enough to open the floor for the civil society and major stakeholders for engaging with the this panel and the member states for the our common concern and aim to the pollution-free planet. We have some major concerns in this agenda that we are moving for, and we are engaging so much of peoples to get our to the common point or the common agenda to make it to the pollution-free planet. But we see that there are lots of obstacles in the way to get to this vision into a reality. I find some of the questions for this wonderful engaging panel that we have a lot of unplanned urbanization going on, especially in the developing countries these days, and the road expansions and is creating so much of hurdle for the peoples. It is like the lot of dust and mud is coming out to the way to the peoples, and it's so horrible that peoples are getting so much of the airborne diseases these days. and the displacement of the peoples on the road to the expansion is also a challenging task for us. And that is also in the cost of the natural resources, trees on the way, and the water resources. That's also engaging things for us. And I think that we need to address these tasks so that we can't lose our natural resources for our future generation. And my second question is how this panel thinks that it will be help on prioritizing the community-made recycled bags and involvement and use of the cooperatives in the initiative to engage community and young peoples on the way to the pollution-free planet. And I also welcome yesterday's Bhutan's initiatives or on the integrating the SDGs and the resource efficiencies on their school curriculum. And I have a question, how we are going to prioritize these tasks and the regional and sub-regional, integrating sub-regional and national plans of integrating SDG, resource efficiency, sustainable consumption, production, and motivating young students and youth for the sustainable production through organic farming. Thank you again.
Thank you, thank you. That's the energy of the youth. Let me now call on the NGO for the last, I think, speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm Jutha Tipmanipong. I'm from Thailand Environment Institute. I'm going to raise the issue that I do agree with the panelists about the measures, legal, economics, and incentives that you have raised. They're very wonderful. I would like to address the issue that maybe has been missing about the freedom of information, access to information. For people, civil society, and other stakeholders, we need to be able to access to the information. Therefore, that we can participate in the decision making and in the auditing in the meaningful ways, and so that we can collaborate and support for the engagement. And the second issue is the information that should be available. It's not only upon the request, it should be available both hard copies and then online available. And also another issue, it's about the user-friendly of the data and the informations, because we need to be able to use it in the meaningful ways and then to be able to account the implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Can you imagine if we did not extend the session by 5 minutes, we will not be hearing these very good inputs. It can save the earth. It can save the world. Can we now ask the panelists to please respond to these concerns, please? I think the issue was one on the mining and indigenous peoples, one is on farmers, and the other one is more on the plastics, please.
Thank you. I'll start. My colleagues will have more comprehensive answers. The lack of information, may I start with the last one? I certainly mentioned that in my presentation. It is our concern as well. In the Pacific, the lack of information, the waste are there, the chemicals, and whether we have the information to manage and controls and the flow and the movement of this waste is a big issue for the Pacific, and we have asked UNEP to step in and help in that area. So hopefully we can establish some sort of system put some system in place to get some touches and start working on them. But certainly the sharing of information is why we are here. We can share experiences and improve, learn from one another, and improve on what we do. Plastic bags, I think it's a challenge that Pankletis also raised earlier. We have to find alternative, but really I think the name that was given to me was biodegradable bags that were used as an alternative. Unfortunately, there were also other issues with that particular bag. So there's brown bags being introduced. And for fish, they use newspapers, old newspaper to wrap. So I think it's a challenging issue, and the difficulty of implementation is another thing. Fiji yesterday mentioned a 10% tax on plastic bags, which I think is another area we can look at in terms of implementation. I'll pass it to my colleague to assist with more answers.
Mr. Akif, please.
There are a number of ideas, like for instance, Bangladesh and Pakistan are big producers of textiles. So textile waste, in fact, these small strips of cloth, which are useful for nothing else. So we have tried this. It's a small-scale intervention under the JEF small-scale grant, which is that we take up the textile waste, because before they were burning all this textile waste. So because there was no use for this textile waste, so we are making bags. The bags create livelihood for rural women. And we take the bags and we put them free of cost at the big retailers. Because you need to create both positive and negative incentives, like when Kenya has recently introduced this. I mean, the negative incentive is a huge fine in the tens of thousands of dollars. I mean, obviously, poor people cannot pay such immense fines, but you need to create incentives on both sides. And unless something, I mean, any alternative which does not make money is not likely to work, because the market is the best judge and the best measure. And a number of small innovations have come in, like in many countries you use boilers for heating the water during the winter. And normally the boilers are in one part of the house, and you waste a lot of water while the hot water comes in. And secondly, you use the boilers only for 1 or 2 hours. In the morning, everybody takes a bath. Maybe in the evening, everybody takes a bath. But the boilers are on 24 hours just because you use them for 2 hours. So a Pakistani company has come in with an attachment, which is $40, which fits on top of the boiler, but it is programmable from your mobile phone. So even if you forget to turn off the boiler, you can just send a signal from your office and you can. So I mean, innovative technologies are coming in. And like solar power, because initially the capital investment on solar power is very big. So poor people cannot normally afford it. So an Australian company has come to Pakistan and they offer a pay-as-you-go solution. They will install the main capital cost, and just as you are paying for the electricity, you just pay for the electricity. It's on your roof. It's a pay-as-you-go solution. So there are many innovative solutions, and one idea that has come to me is that before we go to UNIA 3, we'll put out a small booklet and a small digital platform in which we try to get all the good ideas from Pakistan at least. Thank you.
Okay. The side events are already starting. I will communicate with you. I'll go to you and respond on the issue on mining and indigenous peoples and the farmers. But let me now end the discussion, because as I was told the side events are already starting. And let me now give the microphone to the MC for some announcements.
An evaluation questionnaire has been distributed to the desk of each delegation to seek your views on the relevance, effectiveness, and quality of the ministerial summit. So we encourage you and each delegation to please take a few minutes to fill in the questionnaire to help us improve future summits. We kindly ask you to complete the questionnaire at the end of the summit or prior to your departure. Please drop your completed questionnaires in the box at the DSA payment counter outside this room or conference room 2. And thank you so much for taking the time to provide us with your feedback. We also invite delegates to join one of the side events that's taking place during the lunch break. And the side event towards resource-efficient Asia-Pacific through the Solo Initiative Network on Green Growth will take place in conference room 4. That's on the first floor from 12:50 to 2 p.m. A cocktail lunch will be provided from 12:20 to 12:50. And in conference room 3, the Social Development Division of ESCAP will host a side event to launch their report on gender, the environment, and sustainable development in Asia Pacific. This is a report that identifies strategies, entry points for policy interventions towards a truly inclusive, sustainable Asia-Pacific. A light lunch will be served outside the conference room from 12 o'clock, followed by a panel discussion. Also during the break, we will replay a short video based on the background document prepared for the ministerial summit, which is available on the summit website for the convenience of the delegates who may have missed the screening yesterday. And this is important. We will resume here in conference room 2, this room, after lunch at 2 p.m. sharp for a special event on strengthening regional ocean governance and partnership towards clean seas. UN Environment will also be hosting a lunch or a light lunch at the reception floor, that's the ground floor, from now until 2 p.m. And thank you very much and enjoy your lunch and please be on time. Thank you.